Okay. Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Thanks for coming. My name is Christine Dykman, and I am helping clients to see the light, as well as an HR generalist over on a manufacturing plant in Lakewood, New Jersey. And today's guest is Claire Chandler. Claire is going to speak to us for Garden State Council, SHRM, and let us know about how to accelerate growth by building trust. And building trust has been a huge part of trying to have our employee retention, trying to keep employees and not have them leave. So we're going to talk about ways to do that. And this is one of the ways that you can keep in mind your growth pattern for your business, as well as increase trust among your employees so that you can achieve those strategic goals. So, Claire, take it away.
Hey, Christine, thanks. It is so great to share your stage and to connect with you again. I'm super excited to share some golden nuggets with your audience. As you said in the intro, growth and trust go together. You can't have one without the other. So if your audience remembers nothing else today, remember that they do go hand in hand. So if you do want to grow your business in any way, you have to make sure that the trust is there. Because once broken, it is extremely hard to repair and get back on the right road toward growth. So I'm really excited to kind of tell some stories here today and share some knowledge and interact with the audience.
That is awesome. Now, Claire, you have written so many articles and white papers and really are paying it forward to help other HR practitioners to accelerate their growth. We talked a lot about just increasing employee retention, and you do have some tips for that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and please let us know what those tips are, because all of us here on this call might get a tidbit or two that we can take away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that the audience is already starting to interact in the chat, which is fantastic. So please keep that going. And what I would love for you to do, in addition to sharing where you are tuning in from, is just to drop a comment in the chat about culture. So culture is my jam. That is the sort of the core of my mission and my vision. And being a corporate survivor turned solopreneur, I am really dedicated to helping turn around the image of corporate America from being that meme that we are constantly putting out on Facebook and on LinkedIn, to truly being an accelerator of talent and an enforcer of community versus an enforcer of conformity. So I'd love for people to kind of drop in the chat what culture done wrong looks like. And whether that's lack of trust, whatever that looks like for you. And I'm sure we have a lot of folks in the audience who are tuning in from a corporate job, or have at least, spent some time in the corporate halls. I'd love to hear from the audience what culture done wrong looks like to you. And while you're dropping those comments, and I want to tell a quick story. So about a year before I left corporate America, and I left in 2011, I was vice president of human resources at the time, and I was walking down the hall toward my office. And yeah, infighting, totally what culture done wrong looks like. Thank you. And I was walking down the hall back to my office. I think I probably had like a 2-minute window to run to the ladies' room between meetings, right? We all kind of know what that looks like. And my boss stopped me in the hall. And he said, "You need to tone down your walk." And I go, ever eloquent, I go, "What now?" And he said, your walk. He goes, it's so bouncy and it's too happy, and people are going to wonder, like, if you're up to something, if you know something that they don't. And, being a good corporate employee, I thanked him for that great feedback, and I went back to my office. And, long story short, I didn't tone down anything. And in that moment, I didn't recognize that as the sign that it was. But in hindsight, it has become so clear that that type of conversation and that sort of corrective feedback was emblematic of what culture done wrong looks like. And so I'm sure as culture done wrong is exhausting, Lisa says. Could not agree with you more. Absolutely. There's a couple of other symptoms in here that we see of culture done wrong, right? Madly yelling at employees, especially in front of other employees, right? Within earshot of other employees. There's a golden rule about praising publicly and criticizing privately that a lot of cultures get wrong.
You know what? Let me ask you, Claire. I know that you're in the middle of that story, but
Sure.
you talk about it from an HR standpoint. And although many of us on this call are in that HR category, career counseling category, I wonder, is culture something that is just HR's responsibility to manage and to only walk nice down the hall? Or is it other managers? And maybe you're getting to that point in a little bit, but I'm wondering, is it all falling on our shoulders because we have so much on our shoulders as today?
Oh my gosh. So I'm so glad you jumped in with that question, because that is the other piece that I think so many companies get wrong. They hear a word like culture and they hear words like engagement or anything that is sort of synonymous of that, or elements of positive culture, and they immediately go, well, that's an HR activity. Culture is not an HR activity. Here's the thing. Leaders shape culture. A lot of leaders misunderstand, and they believe that culture bubbles up organically from the bottom, from the boots on the ground, from the frontline workers. But employees watch the behavior of leaders. The biggest impact on the culture of a company is the behavior of its leaders. And so leaders across the board within HR and beyond HR need to truly understand the absolute impact their words, their actions, and their behavior have on the formation of culture, because culture is foundational.
Do we need to worry about some departments and some managers having a certain outlook or culture versus other departments may have a different outlook or culture that they're bringing to their organization, and then you're kind of pitting a group against a group, or I see life this way and you see life that way, and how do we get them on the same page?
Yeah, so important. And especially what I'm seeing a lot of now, especially with the clients that I get the opportunity to serve, more and more organizations are growing through mergers or acquisitions, right? They are realizing that they want to grow and scale and expand. And that the best way for them to do that is to do that by large groups rather than one hire at a time. And of course, that can absolutely amplify growth when done right.
Absolutely.
When done wrong, and you bring in two different organizations, even if they look on paper like they are complementary, they are going to have, to your point, very different cultures. I have seen mergers of two competitors, same industry, same client base, same market that they're fighting over, that when they come together, they are met with silos in each company, that when you come together, they don't bring those walls down, they actually build them stronger. There are political clashes, there are culture clashes, there are distinct differences in philosophy and ideology. And so to your question, it is not just important, it's mission critical that companies figure out how to blend the best of cultures, whether they're merging, acquiring other entities or not, or just trying to grow stronger within their own organization. They have to solidify culture. Part of that absolutely is trust, and they have to firm it up. They have to build it. They have to rebuild it if it's broken. But it's so much more than that. And I mean, you look at all the statistics, you look at the studies. Gartner has done studies, Mercer, McKinsey, Aon Hewitt did a study a few years ago, and they said the 7 out of the top 10 drivers of failure of mergers or acquisitions are related to culture. It's around implementation taking longer than it should have taken. It's integration of cultures is the second biggest driver of failure. People strategies, infighting among the leaders. Somebody earlier said in the chat, infighting is a big red flag of culture done wrong. So it's not just an HR activity, and culture is not a nice to have. Trust is not a nice to have. If organizations don't have that, whether they're growing by M&A or just trying to build a sustainable business, they will fail if they don't get this right.
So do we have to worry about trust necessarily for, especially when we're doing mergers and acquisitions? You know, we have two companies, they've been there a while, they're merging together, we've got lots of senior leadership. We need to get them all on the same page. We need to get some kind of congruent culture that is working from the top down. And as Terrence has said, you know, when senior leaders are the harasser in chief, then that kind of trickles down to other leaders being the harasser. When they're not that harasser and they're looking for the best moving forward, is it really important to focus on new hires or onboarding or that first 90 days? Or do we really need to focus on the top down first before we can really think about those people that are coming into the organization?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complex, right? Because it's sort of all of those things.
Oh my goodness gracious, I'm tired. And it's like only
yeah.
9, 10 a.m.
And like somebody else said, you know, culture gone wrong is exhausting. I think Lisa said it's so true. If you're going to build the right culture, and if you've been in business for any period of time, if you haven't intentionally been forming and nurturing the culture that you want to see to truly be the bedrock and the foundation of your business, all is not lost. But you do have to focus on it more intentionally. And there are a couple of ways to do that. Yes, absolutely. It has to be from the leadership on down, because your people are watching. They see what gets advanced. They see what types of behaviors get rewarded. They see what types of actions get put into the corner office with the comfy chair and all the trappings. And so when leaders walk around and say things like, do as I say, not as I do, and they, you know, earn the title, as Terrence said, of harasser in chief, there's this big disconnect, and then trust is broken. So from the leadership on down, it has to be strengthened. From the inside out, culture has to be formed. So from the very core of what a business is all about. And then as you bring in new employees, the brand promise has to be congruent with the actual working environment and the actual culture at play, because otherwise you are going to build up resentment. Those first 90 days, to your point, are absolutely critical in welcoming the right people, but then positioning them in the right way to be as successful as possible. So it is all of those things, and it can be exhausting, but the payoffs are immense.
Okay. All right. So we did talk about, you know, having different cultures because of different silos, as Paul had asked in the comment box, and trying to get those to mesh along with new employees that are coming into the organization, and then maybe another merger with a whole other organization of different silos in the mix. We're talking a lot of steps on top of just daily, you know, grind of, you know, benefits and disciplinary and, you know, progress reports and all of that stuff. That's a lot. And you're saying that culture and trust really comes from the silo, that department, and HR is just kind of working together with those senior leaders?
So HR contributes immense value, and I have a bias toward HR. We know that us HR professionals get a bad rap, right? But HR has, I think, two very key roles when building culture. One is to be the champion of organizational listening. We don't do that enough. I think most HR practitioners are so inundated with the daily firefighting that they don't necessarily avail themselves of that bigger strategic value that they have to the business, of really deeply listening across silos, across layers, and really understand what are the themes, what are the trends, what are the artifacts of culture we want to strengthen, and what are the red flags that are starting to create cracks in our foundation. So organizational listening is our needs to lean into and practice much, much more on a daily basis. The other is to be a facilitator of culture. You know, one of the things, to kind of come back to your earlier question around, is culture just HR's problem, right? Is culture just our responsibility because our shoulders are feeling weighed down. And from the first moments of this conversation, everyone was kind of feeling that, right? It's like, oh my gosh, there's so much work to do and HR has enough. We need to be facilitators as HR practitioners and thought leaders to really help guide all the leaders across the organization to understand that culture is their problem, their responsibility, and it actually drives business value. I was interacting with some of the folks who had signed up for this event ahead of time, and I said, what are some of your burning questions that you really hope that we get to during this kind of short 1 hour? And a couple of people came back and said, how do we get leaders to actually lean into this conversation and pay attention to culture?
That's a good question, because that was my gun question.
Yeah.
Like,
so here's the thing. Yeah. So there's a couple of things.
A little bit of both, and those.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, absolutely. So and here, there's a couple of things that HR needs to get better at. When looking to get the rest of the business to buy in and lean in and do their part. One is to create a burning platform. And I don't mean setting fire to your desk and hoping that the CEO notices, but I do mean helping people to. All right. Well, don't try that at home, kids. But it does mean really talking a little bit more in the language of business, the consequences of not paying attention to that. So things like the Aon Hewitt information that I shared a few moments ago. The other piece is to really get better at understanding the numbers, understanding the quantitative value. And so forgive me for a second, because I'm going to talk about a business formula, and I have an English degree. Math was not my jam. I like math, but I flirt with the edges of it, right? If you Google, how do you calculate the value of a business? You're going to find dozens, if not hundreds of different formulas, from the really simple, which I kind of, opt for. Right. And then the super calculus and advanced math. The formula that I love, and anybody in HR can replicate this, is business value equals profit times some multiplier, right? And if you think about those two factors that go into business value, profit is kind of very, very easy to think about, right? It grows in a very linear way. It is based on tangible assets. It is relatively finite. And really, when you focus on profit, the math is simple. You want to bring your revenue up and your expenses down. That's how you make a positive change on profit. But let's talk about the multiple. The multiple is where the magic happens, right? The multiple is where you can have exponential growth in the value of your business. It can be limitless. And it is largely based on the more intangible assets than your tangible assets. So if you're wondering, what do I mean by that? What's the difference? Think about your tangible assets as your technology, your products, your operations, your financial capital. Think of your intangible assets as your brand, your services, your intellectual property and institutional knowledge, what we have come to call our human capital. That's the variable in your business value equation that can either really accelerate growth if you feed it in the right way through things like strong culture and trust, or can actually degrade your business very, very quickly. So that's the piece, that's the variable, that's the multiple that we want to focus on when it comes to building stronger cultures that are based on a foundation of trust.
So with that said, how do you even come up with a number? How do you measure the business value when it comes to figuring out your business worth?
So glad you asked that question. And here's another piece that I'm going to pick on HR for a second, because I spent a good number of years in HR and I work a lot with some amazing HR professionals.
All the people in the chat I can see are HR. They're not going to like you very much, Claire.
I know. Well, here's the thing. We're not crazy about math. We find it difficult to talk to the finance department. And listen, finance kind of earned the reputation. So those of you in the audience who are from finance or accounting, we dodge your phone calls around November because we know why you're calling. You're calling to get back money from our budget because we haven't spent it yet, right? So there's sort of this tension between the two. But HR's got to get better about having a conversation around numbers. When you think about what goes into that multiple, right? That exponential variable that can really amplify growth. There are a couple of things. It's the quality of your people or your talent. It's the capacity and the capability and the cohesion of your leadership. And it's the alignment between your culture and your strategy, right? There is no leader who can argue that without your people rowing in the right direction, that you're not going to achieve your strategy. There is no leader, unless they are literally living under a rock, that would deny that that is true. You cannot grow without your people. And they have to be in alignment. They have to be capable. They have to be motivated, and they have to be locked in, right? So the way that you do that is you have to know your numbers. So here's where I'm going to pick on HR for a second, because HR has gotten really, really good over the last, I'll say 5 to 10 years, about measuring things. And we have all sorts of metrics. And if I asked you in the chat to tell me how many different metrics you track in HR right now, you're probably going to say, oh, we track like 15, we track 20, we've got 50. Like somebody in the audience is going to say, we've got a dashboard of 50 metrics. Good for you. But here's the thing. When we're talking about measuring culture, I want you to focus on 3 numbers. 3. And you already have them. I am confident you already have them. The first one is your retention rate. And so a lot of people in HR focus on turnover, but let's focus on the positive side of that. What is the rate of retention in terms of how, what percentage of your workforce do you retain over a certain period of time? Over 3 years, let's be conservative, over 18 months, whatever that looks like for you. And it might be very unique to you. So retention rate is the first one, because the consequences of not measuring that and moving that in a positive direction are big. We all know the scary statistic that every time you lose an employee, it costs upwards of, twice their salary to replace them, right? So we need to give people a reason to stay. And we can only do that if we measure our progress. So I want you to look up your retention rate. The second number is your engagement rate. So everybody does some form of engagement survey, pulse check, whatever you're doing to capture your current rate of engagement. Because the opposite of that is, as engagement declines, your employee relations issues go up. And you're all going to groan in the audience when you hear that, because I know that part of your firefight is dealing with progressive discipline. It's dealing with managers who say, I need you to fire this person. And we go, where's your documentation? And it just increases in volume. So the less you pay
for me, and I don't even know about it. Like, I think there must be a fly on the wall or something.
Because these are common symptoms, right? These are things that we're all struggling with, and we're firefighting on the wrong end of the hose. Like, the ER volume is getting crazy because we're not doing enough with the engagement numbers. Gallup does a lot of studies around engagement that for every downtick in engagement, the more your employees are disengaged or at least ambivalent, the more your productivity drops, the more your profitability drops, right? So in addition to giving people a reason to stay, we need to give them a reason to contribute. So that's the second one. So that's engagement rate. The third one, people may not really be tracking, but they can calculate this. And it's something called your IHR, your internal hire rate. This one is really significant to keep an eye on. The higher percentage of vacant positions, especially as you sort of ascend through your talent ladder, that you fill with internal people, the stronger that is an indication that you have a good fit, sustainable talent pipeline. The opposite of that, when you have a lower IHR, is you have significant succession gaps. If you think about your highest ranking leaders and your key position holders, how many of them not only have a succession plan, but a realistic plan, an actual successor candidate that you can identify and that you can get ready over a short period of time? It's really important to track that as well, because external hires cost at least 18% more than an internal promotion. And they're over 20% more likely to leave within the first year, which of course is going to hit your retention rate again.
So let me ask you, when you say succession plan, is it HR's job to figure out who that successor should be based on their skills and their interest, or is it the the leader or the person that's getting close to retirement or leaving that thinks that would be a good person to take the helms of whatever they're doing. Like, I'm not really sure. I mean, we're talking about HR, but at the same time, they do the job, daily. So how does that work?
Yeah, so this is where I'm going to gain back some of my HR fans, because they probably didn't like me about the whole math side of this conversation. But the answer is no. HR is not responsible for building out succession plans. But here's where those dual roles of being an organizational listener and being a facilitator really come into play. If you want to get out ahead of your rising ER volume, the progressive discipline conversations, the turnover and constantly having to recruit to backfill positions, facilitate conversations with your managers and with your leaders. Sure, give them a framework, give them a standard tool to use to kind of get out on one page what their succession map might look like. But the onus is on the managers, the onus is on the leaders of people to be mining talent, to be nurturing talent, and to be understanding how do we ensure business continuity by making sure that if I get hit by the beer truck or I win the lottery, that the business will still continue. And so HR has to stop taking ownership for putting together those plans and start leaning into their role, which is really a fun role of being the organizational listener and the facilitator, right? So when you pull these three numbers together, so that internal hire rate, I said with the retention rate, we have to give people a reason to stay. With the engagement rate, we have to give people a reason to contribute. And with the internal hire rate, we have to give people a reason to grow. We have to help them to see a career path, which a lot of employees, if we are being good organizational listeners, will tell us, I don't see a clear path for me here. That is a telltale sign that if we don't help them find that, even if it's self-driven, right? If we don't at least put some tools in their hands where they can learn on their own, not only are they not going to grow their own career, they're not going to help you grow your business.
Okay. Well, Rod had mentioned in the chat that he's transitioned to being a CHRO. And what we have to do in the past is to judge leaders on having the answers. And transitioning, then maybe we should look at those leaders to asking great questions to get the great responses, and then build those relationships based on listening as opposed to knowing everything. Because honestly, I agree with Rod. We're not God. We don't know everything. We're going to have to lean on the people around us for that information. And it sounds very similar to what you're saying right now.
Well, and there's a reason, words matter. And I try to be very intentional in the words that I use in my own messaging. And there's a reason that I said facilitator as an HR role versus trainer, right? Training has its place, but really the way that you move people from where they are to where they need to be, whether behaviorally, performance-wise, skill level, is not necessarily by teaching them, but really being the guide and helping them answer questions on their own. So I 100% agree with Rod as well. I'm working with a client right now on putting together a framework and a philosophy around coaching in their organization. And we were having this really great discussion yesterday around word choice, when it comes to, because I think to Rod's point, a lot of managers put a lot of pressure on themselves that they have to teach their employees how to do their job better. And as a result of that, they don't do coaching on a regular basis because they're overcomplicating it. They're overthinking it. And to Rod's point, they're thinking that they have to have all the answers in a coaching conversation. And therefore the solution is not to have it at all. And so we're building this coaching framework around exactly to Rod's point. And now I'm starting to suspect he was listening in on the conversation yesterday, because it was all around, you have to switch your mindset as a people manager from thinking you have to be a teacher to understanding that you are a guide. And the way to do that is by not going into a conversation expecting that you're going to have all the answers, but exactly what Rod said, which is asking powerful questions and actively listening to the answers.
Okay. I like that. again, it makes me a little tired, but
look, here's the thing, like with anything else that is worth doing well, we are trying to build organizations for the long haul. And HR has a very pivotal role in helping organizations to do that and build up their muscles across the leadership spectrum as nurturers of talent. It can't just be HR's job to build and roll out training modules. It has to be an organizational discipline and mission to guide employees, meet them where they are, and help move them forward toward achieving a shared mission. And some of the ways you do that, yes, are absolutely by demonstrating and practicing trust, but it's also by helping employees find a deeper connection between what they believe in, what they're good at, and how it's going to impact the greater mission of the organization. So, managers have that role.
That right there, because what you're saying is coaching. What you're saying is what Danielle's saying, having a player or coach mentality is key. Whereas this is your baseball team and you are the coach, you are not a player. You are not the team lead on the whole baseball team. You're coaching the team to be better players, and you're not playing yourself, but you are getting them to have their best performance that they possibly can.
And putting them in the right positions. So I think that analogy is key, right? Because to your point, the baseball manager does not have to be an expert in how to play shortstop or how to play center field or how to be a catcher or a pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
He or she does, however, need to be really good at understanding the bigger strategy and putting the players into the right positions at the right time, having a backup plan to succeed a player when they don't have their stuff that day, that season, etc., and making sure that everyone stays motivated and focused on what is the shared goal, which for a baseball team ultimately is to win the World Series. Well, you do that one game at a time, and you do that by playing together as a team. You do that through communication. I will yell at the TV every time two outfielders almost collide because they don't communicate. And it's like, you got to communicate. It's the same thing in business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's kind of funny. It's such a simple concept, and yet we're trying to put out fires in so many areas that if we take a step back, then maybe we wouldn't have so many fires to put out if we did a lot of what you are saying.
So thank you so you just illustrated the point, right? Because like I said, and you said earlier, this is very tiring. The thought of this is exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
We are trying to build our organizations to win the World Series, to win the Super Bowl. This is not something that you can just do instantaneously. There's no magic pill. There's no magic switch. There's no magic button. If there were, and I had it, believe me, you would pay me millions to sell it to you. But there isn't. We have to do the groundwork. And I don't mean we as HR. I mean we collectively in an organization. But again, HR is in a pivotal role to guide the organization to actually accept their responsibility for nurturing talent, for building and reinforcing a strong culture, and for demonstrating mission critical behaviors like trust and vulnerability.
So let me ask you this, Claire. We talk a lot about trust. We talk about culture. And from an HR standpoint, maybe we walk through the halls and we go to different departments and everything seems hunky-dory, and the trust factors and responses on employee engagement surveys are, pretty high. And maybe the trust isn't necessarily there. How do we know what the culture and trust factors are really, as opposed to, oh, they might be tracking me, so I'm going to give you the best score, that kind of thing?
Yeah, great question. And unfortunately, that happens too often, right? If we were just tracking engagement, if we were just relying on our engagement scores as the sole determinant of whether our culture is strong or not, we would be missing the mark. It is one of the reasons that we want to bring at least those three numbers, the retention, the engagement, internal hire rate, together and use those as sort of cross sections or, different lenses. Really, really important. But going back to engagement specifically for a second, I work with companies all the time on this very thing as well, not administering their survey, but actually answering the question that you just posed, which is, what is it saying about us really? And again, the way that you do that is by facilitating open, transparent conversations. And you have to establish trust first. I know that's the key word for this entire conversation. And it is hugely important, because if your engagement scores are super high, but in the back of your mind, that's not telling the full story. One of the ways you look at that is participation rate, right? So you might have really high engagement scores, but only 25% of your employees participated. That is hugely telling as well, right? So engagement rate is a piece of the story, but it also has to be somewhat graded on a curve based on your level of participation. And then the way that you kind of dig into those numbers, again, you can only do this when you establish an environment of trust, is to use that as a jumping off point, but then break that down and have conversations in the business with different pockets of the organization. And whether you do that as an internal HR person, you bring in a manager from a different division who has a little bit more objectivity, you bring in somebody like me from the outside to facilitate that dialogue, but you want to understand a little bit more of what the numbers are telling you and what they're not saying. Because numbers on their own are not going to guide the right actions that are going to actually move the needle. And I am so sick and tired of organizations just doing engagement surveys for the sake of saying that they do engagement surveys. If you do nothing with it, right? If you do it the first time and you do a great communication campaign and get everybody jazzed to participate, that's super. If you do nothing with it, your engagement scores are going to drop the next year, but your participation rate in particular is going to suffer. And your participation rate in engagement surveys is a bigger metric that feeds what that engagement is really, really telling you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's wonderful. Michael Tim's he joined us today. Thank you very much. But developing coaching skills, I don't think that SHRM or any other HR organization really talks about coaching enough. And coaching is a topic that really needs to be integrated into HR on a daily basis and what we do. But it's very critical that we do this to help the organization, to help move it forward, to increase that needle point. And he's recommending Keith Ferrazzi's book, Leading Without Authority. And it's discussing transforming teams and collaboration to elevate organizations. Have you heard of that before, Claire?
I have not heard of that book, but Michael, so glad to see that you're in this conversation. Great to see you at least virtually again. Thank you for the book recommendation. I have recently gotten hooked on Audible. I like the feel of a hard copy book, but I also hate exercise. And so the deal I have made with myself is I only get to listen to really good business books if I'm also walking on the treadmill or walking outside. So that has become my motivation. So I'm definitely going to look into that book. I want to kind of drill in on this coaching point, because I think it's really important, and it seems to be kind of resonating with our audience here today. It is interesting to me that SHRM has not really emphasized coaching as a discipline in a business as a skill set, or within HR. And it's interesting. I had a client a couple of years ago say, we want to train up HR, because again, it is not on HR's shoulders to be the coach to everybody, but we have a really interesting and very pivotal cross-sectional role if we demonstrate coaching and we help managers to sort of, model what we can do. Anyway, so they reached out to me and they said, we want to train up our HR practitioners on how to be good coaches. And we have been searching SHRM, and we've been searching all of the resources that are available online, and we can't find a good program for teaching HR how to be coaches. And so we designed a program for them. But it is very interesting because, this is one of those skill sets that are so foundational to good people leadership and to good thought partnership, that we need to pay closer attention to it. If it's important that our people managers have it, it is probably important that our HR practitioners figure out how to do it effectively as well.
I agree wholeheartedly. So we have some really heavy hitters in the audience today, and I hope that you take it back. Please add that to the section of the SHRM, the test, the instructions, and
Yes.
what we're doing on a daily basis, because so much in 2023 is about coaching. And I am finding that the better HR managers in the field, in the industry, have some kind of coaching certification or coaching component that they use on a daily basis. And they're definitely taking advantage of that information. So, and using it, which is awesome. So I think that for all of us who do not necessarily have a coaching component, it is going to be helpful. Absolutely. I agree with you.
Well, and I think just, further to that point, when people understand how to do coaching and incorporate it into, in a very natural way as part of the way that they either lead their people or just interact, when you show up to a conversation, when you show up to a meeting, when you show up to any sort of interaction from a place of coaching, not because, again, you have all the answers, but because being a coach embodies meeting people where they are, understanding where they want to get to, and being some sort of a facilitator or guide toward helping them close that gap. If we show up to more interactions like that, especially in HR, from that standpoint, then, this is how we get to practice being a facilitator. This is how we open up organizational listening as more of a natural practice. And if you're good at being a coach, especially as a manager, over time, you are going to build up trust. And that, as we know, is foundational to growing your business.
So please expand on increasing employee trust through listening. We're increasing trust is really having an effect on the culture. How does that relate? Accelerating growth. You're building trust in order to build the culture. Remember, we talked about those numbers in that formula in the beginning. How does this all intertwine and relate?
Yeah. So, it's kind of, I don't really want to do this, but I want to press the bruise a little bit more in terms of what the lack of trust and what the lack of a strong culture kind of do to your business. Because the longer you ignore culture, or at least don't actively nurture it, the more you're going to run into problems that only get progressively worse, right? I talked about the rising ER volume, employee relations volume, which obviously a lot of HR practitioners and companies are struggling with. But you get things like lower performance for individuals, lower team performance. You get lower market competitiveness. When your culture is fractured and people don't trust the leaders that they are trying to follow, they're not going to step in and give you more innovative ideas. They're not going to expend discretionary effort. They're not going to be engaged. They're not going to participate in surveys. They're not going to stay. They're not going to have any motivation to grow. They're not going to have any motivation to help their boss look good, which I emphatically believe is the number one bullet on every job description, is to make your boss look good. Well, if you don't trust them, if you think they don't know what they're doing, or you think that, you can't be real with them because they are going to use it against you somehow. This is why those memes about corporate America exist. This is why people walk around on a Sunday and say, "Don't Monday my Sunday." This is why some people, the closer they get to their office on a Monday morning, the more their stomach churns. We have to reverse that, because when culture's done right, there's this saying, success leaves clues, right? Well, so does culture. And some of the ways that you recognize a good culture, and I'd love for people to drop in the chat some of the clues they see when culture is done right and when trust is a natural part of your working environment. But you see things like employees proudly sharing stories about where they work and what they do, right? That they are proud to wear the company logo, or to tell their friends at a barbecue, "This is what I got to do this week." right?
Do you think that, going off exactly what you're saying, do you think that's a marketing ploy? Do you think that the people that are praising their company out the wazoo is all about statistics and patting the company on the back? Or do you think that it's really their true feeling and from the heart of how they want everyone to work there because they are just so proud of the company?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and that kind of just triggered for me. Somebody had asked me a question, one of the attendees ahead of this session, and said, how do you sort of translate what you're going to talk about in terms of trust and in terms of culture within an organization toward customers? And a lot of these same principles that we're talking about and the same consequences of not paying attention to this apply to attrition around customers, just like it applies to employees. But I'm reminded of, this when I used to do like customer relations training. There's this statistic. It's something to the effect of, when a customer has a positive experience with you, they tell 4 people about it on average. When they have a negative experience with you, they tell somewhere between 15 to 20 people. And that came up for me as you were posing that question, because I think the same is true with employees who have a positive experience within your culture or a negative experience. Employee referral programs are really great for widening the avenues toward candidates that might otherwise not notice your job posting. And some might argue that that's a marketing ploy, that people are only going to recommend their friends or people within their visible network to get a payout. And that may be true for the first referral, but over time, people don't stay for the money. Now, I don't think if you handed an employee a raise or a bonus, they're going to say, no, thank you. I'm fine. I don't need it. But the staying power of a referral program is not just the monetary incentive. It's the reputation that they have in their local community by vouching for your company to their friends. And so I think, any sort of suspicion or concern that some of these things might be a marketing ploy, I think will get proven over time, that their effectiveness will continue long after the shine of the payout fades.
The reason I ask is that I see some of the comments in and who is attending today. And some of them are career counselors who counsel job seekers, or recruiters that are doing those interviews one-on-one daily over and over and over again. And they may need to differentiate, they say it's a good place to work, and I think it's a good place to work, but that's their brand, that it's a good place to work, and they're ranked XYZ in the top 10 of best places to work, but yet everyone is negative. Like, how do they know and be able to differentiate? And you provided a wonderful answer there, Claire. And I agree. Branding is everything, really. And they're only going to refer people they want to work with. They don't want to do extra work because
right. Well, and here's the other thing, right? Like I've gone on a rant about this on podcast interviews, but I'll go on a mini rant and I'll keep it short. It drives me crazy when organizations, and almost 100% of them do this, advertise for job candidates who have an entrepreneurial spirit. And it's wonderful. And I get why you want that, because these are people who are going to think outside the box for you. They're going to find more efficient and effective and flexible ways to get work done and to move the needle faster towards your shared mission, if you let them do it. Mm-hmm. But the problem is when you hire people with entrepreneurial spirit, but then you manage them to conform to just the bullets on the job description, and you slap them back when they do stumble, or when one of their innovative ideas does not actually pan out, and you don't live the mantra of failing forward, and you don't truly get the fact that we learn and grow far more from our stumbles than from our successes, then that disconnect is going to erode your brand over time. If your brand promise is not delivered, comment. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Paul says it wonderfully. Culture done right equals sharing the company history and story. How we fell backwards, fell forward, and it created this product, and we, morphed into this because we found out that we could do whatever it happens to be, but how you got there in the different steps. And I really do agree with you, Paul, that is part of the company history of how it was founded and how it was created. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that, Paul. I love that, Paul. Danielle's got a great sort of culture clue here. Talking about, because when we said culture done right, what does that look like? When people eat lunch together from different departments, or when you as the HR leader walk into the office and people are happy to see you and they actually say hello or good morning, or they have a conversation, or they just check in with each other.
Yes.
When you notice that, and especially when you notice the absence of that, it speaks volumes. And we have
It
work to do.
absolutely does. It's so funny that you mentioned that, Claire, because I'm like, I am not the principal's office. Like, you can come talk to me. I'm cool. I'm neutral. Whatever Switzerland. There you go. It doesn't have to be because you have a problem and you're getting called to the principal's office. What did you do? That's not the case. And to be able to see in our lunchroom other departments and playing cards together, like, who does that? That was amazing to me. And you don't know what you don't know. So Danielle, you are absolutely right. That's a huge thing.
Yeah. And kind of going back to the fact, and feel free to challenge me on this, but I emphatically believe that this is true, that leaders are the ones who have the biggest impact on culture, and leaders have the obligation to shape culture in the right direction. One of the other ways that you can tell when culture is done right is that leaders communicate expectations and decisions and changes in direction with clarity and transparency. When you talk to employees, especially when you want to dig into what the engagement scores really are telling you, and things like, the leaders are not transparent, keep coming up time and time again, that is a telltale sign. Now, they're not at liberty to disclose a lot of confidential information, and we know that. But if the people on the ground are truly your growth engine, if you cannot grow without them, and if their collective efforts and knowledge and engagement and force of their shoulder against the wheel are truly what are going to grow your business, you have to bring them along on the journey. You have to help them to understand why decisions are being made. And to the extent that you can, you have to bring them into that decision-making process. People support what they help to create. And when you do things in a black box, closed door, no information sort of a format, and then you just sort of release the smoke from the chimney and expect your people to fall in line, you're doing it wrong. It doesn't work.
I agree. And you said it well. People support what they help create. Absolutely. And Rod said it doesn't make sense to hire people and then tell them that they have to follow directions and they can't think for themselves, but you hire them based on the fact that they can think and that they're, really smart. So you need to follow through with what is in your job description or you're interviewing for or whatever and make them congruent. So yes, absolutely. If anyone has a few questions, if you could just stick them in the chat box. We do have a few minutes before our time is through, and that would be very helpful. Let's see. Thank you very much, Danielle. I appreciate that. I'm not the principal of a school. See, I thought I was the only one that said that. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, and Katie, you said it very well too. She said when people realize HR is just another employee that they can relate to, it goes a long way.
It absolutely does. Absolutely does. And Terrence had said part of people support what they help create. It's secret sauce. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Absolutely.
And that goes 100%. Such a long way to creating that trust and building culture. So if you do all of those things now, think of all the employees you have. I mean, again, I'm really kind of tired.
Yeah. But listen,
one thing, you can really not spend so much time doing all those other things. So a lot of effort right up front maybe will help you to spend less effort and time doing all those other things that you're not putting out as many fires.
And here's the thing too, because I do want to reassure all of the HR folks in the audience. This is not about you needing to go back and create new tools and new frameworks and new training programs and more work for yourself. It's just about using the conversations you are having in the business more effectively. That's really what it comes down to. So I don't want you folks in HR or, anybody who is in a people leadership capacity to think that the takeaway from this conversation is that we have to do more work. You just have to reallocate the time you're already spending and do it more effectively.
Rod, I love this question because
I
kind of had it in the back of my mind, but I didn't want to go too much off on a tangent here. So Claire, you got a minute to answer this question.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it will take like an hour, but
yeah. So
leaders who aren't self-aware, what do you do with that?
So this is a pretty pervasive problem, unfortunately. Those of you in the audience who are industrial or organizational psychologists can speak to sort of the rise of the psychopathic narcissist and all of that. But it's just because you're not self-aware, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It's hugely important. So, one of the ways that you can raise a level of self-awareness without putting yourself in the line of fire, because I know part of that question is, do I have to be the one to go in front of the leader who is not self-aware and hold up the mirror? And the answer is not necessarily. If you have a good relationship with them, if you have built up, an equity bank of trust and goodwill, you certainly could. But here is where, quite honestly, assessment tools are your best friend. I use assessment tools as part of my work, and I'm happy to talk to you offline about the ones I would recommend to you. But those are great ways for them to kind of get that mirror held up to them. You can bring in a third party to have a coaching conversation with them that is positioned in such a way that they appreciate it as a gift versus as sort of a, I need to kind of get you some humility, right? But self-awareness is absolutely critical to achieving high levels of performance in your individual contributors and especially in your leaders. So there are ways to do that. So we can talk offline, Rod, if you'd like to.
Absolutely. Danielle, I agree. I really like communication and listening, especially using DISC and the personality assessments. There's many out there that somebody can use. I'm DISC certified. I love it. I think it's just a wonderful tool. Some people don't, but then they like other tools, and you're kind of getting the same, gist of it, so to speak. So whatever tool you do like using that works for you, I encourage you to use it, because you're coaching yourself on how to better coach other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just briefly answer the question that was asked by the LinkedIn user here. What about senior leaders who won't take the assessment tool they've approved for everyone else to take? So
I have those too, by the way. So,
so the best way to do that is to step out of the way and let the facilitator of that tool give them the gift of a test drive of the tool. You want to appeal to their ego as the ultimate decision maker and the champion of the program. And you can do it in a way where they get to test drive the power of the tool without having to feel like a participant along with everyone else. They will still get the same value out of the tool without it feeling like they are somehow being singled out.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. I appreciate it. I want to be respectful of your time. I know that you have busy days, and hopefully it's not too busy. Can you sum up 3 points that we can take back and implement right away, Claire? That would be very helpful.
I'd love to. And thank you again. You've been a great audience. No, but seriously, you guys have been so super interactive, and I love the questions and the feedback. Very quickly, 3 ways you can start doing this right now. The first one is, like I said, don't look at this as taking on more work for yourself. Look at this as retooling and enhancing the conversations you're already having. The second would be to really make it part of those conversations to ask powerful questions. As Rod had reinforced earlier, you don't have to have all the answers. but you can equip yourself with more powerful questions and really embrace the role of being an organizational listener and a facilitator. And the final takeaway is go gather those 3 numbers. You have a way of measuring those. And I just want to invite you in the audience, the first 5 people who email me or message me here on LinkedIn with your 3 numbers, I will give you a 1-hour advisory session to help you strategize how to move the needle and apply some frameworks that are going to really bring some value.
I highly recommend it, guys.
First 5.
Absolutely. So what are the 3 things now, Claire?
So the 3 things are repurposing your conversations. The ones that you're already having, don't take on more work for yourself. Just have better conversations. Ask powerful questions. Don't assume that you have to have all the answers, but really, embrace your role as organizational listener and facilitator, and go gather those 3 numbers.
Okay. All right. Very good. So 1, 2, and 3. And you could do those today without too much effort. So that would be awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. Tell your friends to watch the replay because it is recorded. It will be on LinkedIn as well as my YouTube channel. And thank you to Claire for sharing her knowledge and inspiration and expertise on the subject. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Christine. It's been great.
Take care. Until next time, everyone. Bye.